Okay, we will call to order our committee of the whole for this evening. And before we start, we will recognize that we are meeting today on the unceded traditional territories of the Huipachesset and Shuswap First Nations. I do just want to let everybody know as well that we have Councillor Deb Haggard participating virtually tonight. So per our procedures bylaw, she will be required to vote out loud on each recommendation that is brought forward tonight. So we do have an agenda in front of us. Are there any late items from committee members? Seeing none, any late items from our corporate officer?
None from me, Madam Mayor.
Great, then would somebody like to move approval of our agenda? Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Dame. Seeing no comments on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, thank you, none opposed. And we have minutes from the meeting held at 6 p.m. on March 20th, 2023. Move to adopt by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Dame. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried, none opposed. Thank you. So we have no delegations and no unfinished business today, so we'll move right on to our staff reports. Item number 1, Council Code of Conduct, Policy 3002-01, and I will go to a report from our corporate officer to start.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as a brief overview for the draft policy that you have before you, it's predominantly based on the UBCM guidelines and model code of conduct and adapted to the city of Port Alberni. We held a session, a workshop with council to kind of build their code of conduct and determine what council wanted to see as part of the code of conduct to govern their relationships between each other with the community and how we kind of conduct meetings. And within that discussion, it was closely tied to a lot of aspects with the procedures bylaw. And what I'll do right now is I'll turn it over to Jerry Berry, who we had as the lead consultant for the discussions with council, to kind of walk us through the process that council went through, and as well as some of those best practices and really those key points that guided the discussion for council and how we built both of these documents.
Thank you very much. And Jerry, when you come forward, if you don't mind, just turn the microphone on. A lot of people think red is off, but red is on. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor and Council and members of the public, I am Jerry Berry. I just wanted to congratulate you first off for, as an Islander coming in here, I go to many, many city halls all over Western Canada, and the flowers are beautiful, so congratulations to your staff, but there's very rarely that I come into City Hall that it smells so beautiful as well. Really, really nice. And I understand there is a hockey meeting starting, or a hockey game starting at 7:15, so I'll go quickly. Your Worship, I saw last night, part of the thing that council's to be congratulated on is now having the opportunity for live streaming so your public can watch the proceedings with their representative government. And I did see last night that someone had a question about who was Jerry Berry, so I'll just start with an introduction. That's great. That shows that people are actually reading the agenda and being involved. I've been in local government for 45 years. I have a master's degree in public administration. I've been a former corporate officer and city clerk and city manager for over 20 years. And I am an adjunct professor in local government still in terms of public process and ethics. But my role for council in this regard was purely as a facilitator, been termed consultant for the process, but really it was to facilitate council's decision-making in terms of how they would like to proceed. And I'm pleased to report that council was very clear and very consistent in their direction. Rather than starting with a preconceived outcome, we started with first things first and talked about values and how council would like to proceed. And one of the constructs that we talked about that was covered very well by the Director of Corporate Services was this position from Professor Peter Self, where he said that there's really only one question in public administration, and that is where on the continuum between democratic accountability and public involvement and input and efficiency and decision-making and stewardship of taxpayer funds you want it to be. So council had a very fulsome discussion about where they did want to be on that spectrum. And like good community leaders, they said they wanted to advance both ends. And that, in fact, informed both the code of conduct, I'm covering the code of conduct, and the proposed changes to the procedure bylaw now, where council wanted to improve access. They wanted to provide opportunities for public input. And as part of that, there's some subsets. They wanted to ensure an informal process or more informal process where the general public, including those that are City Hall followers and those that are home and those who are occasional followers but everyday taxpayers, have access. Part of that is about safety. And believe it or not, for those of you that are familiar with council meetings, many members of the public really don't like to come to a formal council meeting and stand up in front of a mic like this and try to figure out whether red is on and be on camera. So that was a direction from council which informed proposed changes that council is suggesting tonight in terms of moving to what I think is a more mature and sophisticated and professional approach. I said, I think at the meeting, without any form of disrespect, that in my view, Port Alberni, this might apply to Campbell River as well. I've been on Vancouver Island since 1956. Is moving from more of a teenager to an adult. And with that comes certain structural changes. And those are encompassed in the proposed changes to the procedure bylaw. So that's the democratic accountability side. The other side was the advancing the decision-making side. And council did recognize the truism that, well, we want public input. All decisions have to be made within a reasonable amount of time. Obviously, you could have an infinite amount of public input. And that kind of informed the code of conduct. The Respectful Workplace group of the Union of BC Municipalities has done years, literally years of work on the code of conduct recommendations and the structures. And rather than reinventing that wheel, council chose to adopt early on their values. We had a fulsome discussion. I can remember Council Palola talking a lot about the issue of his experience with prescriptive laws and the difficulties those present. And council opted to take an approach that was value-based rather than prescriptive-based. But it is council's first attempt at a code of conduct, and I imagine that with the fullness of time and public input and experience, that might get updated as we move forward. Thank you, Your Worship. Unless there's any questions, I'll be quiet.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from council to get started? Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry. Then we're going to start with questions from, or going to go to questions from members of the public or input. Mr. Anderson.
I would assume that as discussions proceed, there would be another opportunity to come up on I'm only going to address some of the comments made by Mr. Berry at the moment. And the first, I want to just clarify what some of the discussions that took place yesterday were. I'm not saying that anyone made any accusation, but I wasn't comfortable when what I did, and I say this so Mr. Berry understands where I came from. I asked what his credentials were. Fair question. I already knew, but I wanted to know what the response was from council. And then it came into a point it was almost suggesting that I was questioning his credibility as being someone that we should be working on this. And that was never my intention, and never did I say that. And I got the impression from Mayor Millions that you were suggesting maybe that's where it's coming to. I do not question his credibility. He's got I've checked his past, and he's very qualified to do this. My question was, and it still is today, for some background, I know you've heard it, but I think Mr. Berry should as well, because I'm not sure what discussions have taken place, is that when this was brought up a number of months ago, and about the code of conduct, I was very interested. I thought, this is great. This is what we need, because we never had one here. And I thought it would, just as you did, Mayor Mignons, it would have resolved a number of problems that we were having over the past few years. I was really enthusiastic about it. But my concern that I raised was, in the discussions leading up to a proposed agreement, or propose a plan, how are you going to include, or are you going to include anything from the public, which I firmly believe should have happened, not this late in the date, to give input into what you see the problems sitting in these chairs, and that's fair enough, I understand. And we see our problems from standing here. So I think it was very valid that input from the people that get up and speak. I don't come up and speak because it may feel uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable. I don't feel comfortable getting up here. And reading the report, there's many things there that I don't agree with, and the fact that we're leaving question input period out. I thought that was such a valuable part of the system, and allowed people to express themselves on issues that they thought were important. It didn't require any debate or discussion. 3 minutes, no questions, no report. So, which still remains a concern for me. And I'm going to be quite honest, sometimes I lose focus. I'm getting old. And so I have to keep myself on track. I'm not ashamed of making that comment, but sometimes it's uncomfortable for me to do that. I'm still concerned in reading the report several times, compiled for the report, that I don't see too much evidence that the public's position was part of the information that was gathered to make this decision. And that was talked about yesterday under the bylaw thing, how important it was to have that conversation. To me, it's the whole part of the democratic system. You consult the people that elected you. And that, from what I've read, has not happened. And there's a number of things that can happen if we recognize that this maybe should have been done in more detail. It does state that we can put off, which I don't like it to happen, but I think it may be the best thing, that we can put off forming a plan until we do some more research and more work. And the document says we can put it off as long as the next election or sometime in between. But I'm not satisfied, and I think it's totally undemocratic that we haven't including input from the public. I'm not disappointed in the turnout today. I thought there'd be 5 people. We have 6. It's not because they don't agree. It's just that it's hard to get people to come out and stand up. And a part of I think the council's job over the next 3 years is to make people feel comfortable to come to this meeting and stand up. I have acted in a way that I wish I hadn't over the years, over the last 3 years, and it's partly out of frustration, because part of the code of conduct, as mentioned, is how council works with staff. If staff isn't giving someone the right the answers to questions, then they have the right to go to council, and council should direct that person. Why is this person or these people, why are they not getting answers to these problems? Especially in one case where 3 years have gone by and I'm still looking for a couple answers. So without getting into that, so my problem right now is I'm not seeing anything that involved the city residents in reaching this really important document. I can't emphasize that anymore. And I mentioned at the meeting, it was 3-4 months ago, I got the date back there, too much documents, is that we should take our time and make sure that we took advantage of this opportunity and did a good job of it. No reference on Mr. Barry by any means, and no disrespect, but I think we failed in not doing that. And so before this meeting's over, I'd like to see us put off any decision-making until we do have that conversation, that dialogue with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I do just want to give you the opportunity before you sit down to provide any input into the code of conduct that you'd like, because I want to be clear that no decisions have been made.
understand.
This is a draft, and this is an opportunity for members of the public. Completely appreciate that you wish that would have happened sooner, but tonight is an opportunity to provide input prior to any decisions being made. So you can have another opportunity to come up if you like, but if you have specific input other than that you don't like the process that was followed, if there's anything within the document you'd like to comment on or ask questions about, now is certainly a time to do that.
Well, I believe I've already talked about the process. I'm disappointed in that. To come at the time when we're making decisions and how we should go about this is late in the game, very late in the game. And to come around and say to myself right now, we want to know what you would have done. It's complicated. It's an important document. It needs a lot of thought. And I think that should take place over a period of time. Not ask me what I would change in it. I would change the fact that this discussions should not only pertain to the agenda. That is a drastic step to curtail the input of the residents here. To be able to stand up for 3 minutes, and that was Mr. Douglas, Councillor Douglas's. He put that in as chair, as mayor, and I thought it was. I was going to say that the best thing he did, but there was other things as too, Mr. Council. But it was one of the bestest things he ever did, and that is a huge loss. It allowed people to relieve some of their frustrations, and when you don't have that frustrations building up on you, and I do understand what that's like, when you ask questions for 3 years and you don't get an answer to some of the relevant ones. And that's all I'm getting into right that, but it's relevant to why we should have a code of conduct. I don't want to the discussion to go there. Is that so Mr. Douglas brought that up, and I thought that was a great thing. It allows you to speak freely. You're not getting into a debate, which is being discouraged, according to my reading of the proposed agreement. You may confront a speaker, you may, but you can ask questions, but you can't get into any debate. I wouldn't even call it debate, discussion. Another huge thing to take away the rights of the public. And there's other things too, but to ask me right here on the spur of the moment, I don't think that's a fair respect. I would like to make a report before council on what I think we failed to do. And as Mr. Barry said, this was done in consultation with their council. And I can't understand, since we talked about it, and you talked about it yesterday over the bylaws, the importance of consultation with the public. And we failed to, council dealt with the code of conduct and the fact that they resolved issues that council found that may have inhibited them to do the business that they wanted to do, because public input does. Was it Trudeau that said, democracy sometimes gets in our way? And so there's a bottom line, because is that I don't think we should be making decisions, and I think we should be postponing this. And I don't care what other municipalities do. I do, but we can do better. And this is an opportunity for us to bring the public together to work, so we're not frustrated about the fact that we're not getting proper responses to our questions. It's not just between the council, that's where it's heading. It's not just between council and the staff. It's between council, the staff, and the people. They're all equally important. And if we can resolve that through this code of ethics, you're going to find, I guarantee, that people will act in a more respectful way, and not out of frustration and reluctance of council at times to waver or try and not give proper consideration to what I call difficult questions. So I'm quite willing to give you some ideas, but I don't think it's a fair question to throw that at me right now. It's an important document.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that input that you've provided. Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate you coming, and we had a nice chat yesterday about this as well. Would you be able to give us recommendations at the next meeting of what you feel? Sorry to bring you back up, I apologize, but I just want to make sure, because I understand, and I mean, and I'll go back to when this first started. I didn't believe in a code of conduct, or it was necessary. Maybe it's a little naive, but I look back at my time on council,
not a problem.
and it wasn't something that I thought. And even to this day, I look around the table here, and I don't feel like there's anybody that will go against the code of conduct in their actions. But I understand. I understand why
you're
it's
also
here.
new to council as well.
New with an old ideas, right? It's
with
true.
old-
Like, I look at those old pictures over there of that
Yeah.
young guy who I don't even remember anymore. But that was back in a day where this council was, and I still feel that way with this council. This council is ethical and won't have an issue, and we keep ourselves in check if there is a problem. And I know it's tough, and obviously you've read the document a couple of times. And it's tough to do the recommendations here, but I definitely would like to hear what you believe is wrong with the document, not the process, right?
Well-
Not the process, because as we talked yesterday, to
Yes.
come to the public with a lump of clay and go, here we go, and we wanted to kind of mold it and shape it a bit before we come to have a baseline, a blueprint, an idea first. So. And this is something that you're very passionate about. So if it's
Yes, I
not
am.
tonight, I understand that. There will be another chance at another meeting, but I would love to hear, or we would love to hear, what your recommendations are on the document, not the processor.
Well, no, I don't want to come to the next meeting and do it. I'm giving you a straightforward answer. That may be unusual, but
That's okay. Would you be able to write it down and
No,
email it to us?
No, let me explain what the process should be. I want to know what other members of the public think about it. Just because I have a belief that this isn't right doesn't make it right. I think it's right, and I am very passionate about this because I think it's so important. But I want to have a meeting where I can mingle or talk with other members of the public, hearing the different ideas. And then out of that results in some positive action that can be used to come up with a proper code of action. It's not, I'm not going to resolve anything by coming up here and telling you what I think is going to be happen. You know that. I'm talking about proper consultation from the public, not just one person. I'm quite willing to share that information.
Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I appreciate that. And again, this is one of the avenues. As we talked yesterday with Mr. Fox, it's a sober first look at it, or sober second thought, sorry, before we go to the decision making. And we do have other people in the public in attendance. And like you said, we have more people today than you thought we would. So perhaps as an opportunity, maybe they'll step up and say something, and maybe an idea will come because of it. So,
And it's still not enough. This should have happened
right.
a long time ago.
And fair enough. And again, Mr. Anderson,
And that's,
it's not
my
the
point.
process at this point. It's looking at the document. And if you want to X through it and just go X and tell us it's not good enough, I totally understand that. So,
Yeah.
but we would love to hear your ideas. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had one quick question to make sure I was correct on this, or incorrect, and then a comment, if I may, after that. So the question was probably through you to the CAO. Just reading the procedure here, it looks to me like under a certain section, we're required to establish a code of conduct within 6 months of our election.
Yes, or opt to not, and I believe it has to be by council resolution if we decide not to.
Okay, great. And then I just wanted to make a comment, if I could, to my dear friend, Mr. Anderson. First of all, I'm brokenhearted that he feels that the only thing useful I did in my entire life was to introduce an input period, which really I stole from somebody else in North Vancouver. So, but I thought I'd reserve a comment about that for our next procedural. So I'll go over that again for his pleasure. But the one thing I did want to mention, I thought it might help us, is just to say that, you know, nothing is static in this field that we work in. There's nothing static. You know, we may change bylaws, you know, we may amend variances and procedures about variances. We may amend everything. We're always changing. And so there's always going to be an opportunity with that to make amendments, make deletions, make additions. So I think it's a very good step for us to at least get a basis of a code of conduct that we can use as a foundation. And of course, you know, we have these open meetings, we have input from social media, from people we meet on the street, from everywhere in the community, and we'll always be open to going in and changing that constantly changing toolbox that we work on as it is now and as it evolves in the future. So I was just wondering if that might help, you know, like it's an idea to get at least a foundation for code of conduct. And then, you know, we can amend it as we move on, as I'm sure we will. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Douglas. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak tonight? And ideally, specifically to start to the code of conduct portion of the agenda, understanding that it is related as well to procedures bylaw. So if your comments overlap a bit, that's fine, but we are trying to do code of conduct first. Okay, Ms. Valerius.
Button on. Good, okay. Just dealing with the council code of conduct. Good evening, good afternoon, whatever we are, mayor and council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the council code of conduct. I know it's a difficult process, and many societies, councils, have difficulty even establishing them because they don't feel that they could, are maybe going to follow them, or they're going to not feel that they're living up to the code of conduct. I don't know, I can't, I'm just recalling, but don't remember the whole thing, I've just seen the top portion of it here, that I guess what I'm trying to get to is you got your integrity, accountability, responsibility, and all those good things. It's a public making you responsible to the code of conduct, or is it within their own group?
Thank you, that's a great question. Corporate officer, are you able to speak to that? Or our CIO?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The code of conduct essentially is a conduct that is a document where it is council governs council. Now, there are obviously some accountability mechanisms for, like, obviously it's a policy that's passed for public awareness as well, so there is an element of public accountability, of course, within it. But when it comes to when councillors are engaging with each other or the public, a lot of the provisions within the policy are for councillors to uphold themselves to that conduct for each other, for mechanisms as far as the principles. There isn't any enforcement mechanisms within this document as discussed by council, but should council consider enforcement mechanisms down the road, that would be the discussion for councillors to look at that as a piece of it as well.
Okay, and I think just to follow up to that, there are the enforcement mechanisms that are within the community charter, which councillors do have to hold each other account as well, and there's laid out processes there as well.
Okay, good to know. The other thing is, Councillor Douglas was alluding to it's a living document. So my next question is, how often would this be reviewed? Are you looking at within your term or to the next term?
Thank you. So at this point, council hasn't determined that, and I don't believe we spoke to it in the actual document, proposed document itself, but council certainly could make commitment to a certain schedule of reviewing it. I'm not sure what other municipalities have done, but we could ask our consultant at some point for a recommendation on that as well, or just determine how frequently we would like to relook at it.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just in addition to that, it seems that I don't always get the legislation right, but my understanding of the legislation is that given that we are under an obligation to pass a code of conduct within our first 6 months, or say we won't, that the next administration would be under a similar obligation. And so part of the answer to the question would be that if we don't review it within our term, there will be an required review for the next administration.
Yes, and maybe our corporate officer could just speak to that requirement that I believe it is for each council to adopt.
Absolutely, yeah. Through you, Madam Mayor, you're absolutely correct. And that's why the provision is written that way, so that if a council isn't written in their current code of conduct, or they choose not to have one at all, that there is mechanisms where every council basically will have to look and make the same decision on whether they want a code of conduct or not.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the public on the code of conduct? Come on forward.
Hi, Mayor and Council. My name is Joseph. And it's not the code of conduct because it's combined with the recommendation on the council procedures. Just a couple things that I read through it and was looking at it also. And just a couple things I'm also concerned about the public input. And I appreciate what Mr. Barry said about, I think he said from teenager to adult. That's a good analogy. And also from democracy to, what was the other one?
Efficiency.
Efficiency. So we're looking for that, of course. And I don't see anybody here that looks like teenager, but so hopefully but I understand what he's saying. And there is that, how do you engage the public? How do you move forward? How do you create a place where that is? But also efficiency needs to, otherwise you get bogged down in a lot of things. We all know that. We all want to move forward, but we want to hear, we want voices to be heard. And so how do you do that? And I'm looking at this one here where it says public input to be eliminated from council meetings. Question period remains. That's the way I understand it's written. And during committee of the whole, there will be public input and question period. So it's sort of being shifted over. And it has to relate to the agenda. So again, where is that? And it does say, if you can look to that page where it says we're going to look for other opportunities to do so, to engage the public, just scroll down and look at that, what that says on there. And I did, unfortunately, I took pictures of it on my tablet. I forgot to bring my tablet, but I think we can find it there. And just the wording of that, how you're going to engage and look for other ways of engaging the public so that their voices are heard. And if you can find that on there, you might have to read it for me. I'm not sure my vision's that clear on it. And just read that where it says this is what we're going to do or make attempts to do to make sure that we're engaged in the public a bit more. If somebody can read that for me, if you wouldn't mind, maybe the corporate officer could do that.
Get our corporate officer to read it.
Is that okay?
And I do just want to clarify, I believe the recommendation was not to make public input need to relate to the agenda. That remained open. It was specific to question period.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if that's clear on there or not, but yeah, thank you.
So through you, Madam Mayor, just to address that public input piece. So for now, the way the bylaw is drafted is that public input also relates to items on the agenda. So we'll speak to that when it comes to it. So obviously, if that is a discussion that council wants to have around that item, absolutely. Is this the piece here that you're referring to?
Well, it
Otherwise,
mentions,
I can generally speak to it because
Yeah,
I
it
wrote
just-
the report. So
yeah, it just mentioned some of the other avenues, and I think one says, it doesn't use this terminology, but it says like passing out pamphlets. It doesn't say passing out pamphlets, but it says some sort of way of getting it out there for public input. And I went, okay, what are you gonna do with that? Pass leaflets out. It doesn't say leaflets, but I can't remember the wording in there. But again, I think the request is, how are we doing that? And I don't see a specific way of saying, this is how we're going to actually resolve having more public input so that that feels, because that's pretty vague on there as far as that what concerns. And it would be nice to hear some specifics maybe on how you're going to do that.
Thank you for
Because
that.
if you take away one without replacing another, that's going to have that solid base that you
Absolutely.
want from the public, or that solid input. It's kind of not there. So yeah.
Thank
So
you.
my concern is some of those shifts that you're making without having something solid in place. Yeah. Thank you.
Corporate Officer, could you speak to that?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. So with how the provisions are worded in the bylaw and how the public input versus question period work, the focus of the procedures bylaw is around the committee of the whole and the council meeting itself. So that doesn't capture any other additional public input opportunities that the city may engage in. So that includes things through our like our online portals where we have, public surveys or other public input opportunities. It wouldn't necessarily include if we had off-site workshops or other kind of public meetings. So there's a variety of different kind of platforms that the city could explore, depending on the initiative, depending on, the city program and the council direction for how much engagement they want to do. And then further to that, obviously, we have other methods through newspaper ads, notices, direct circulations like pamphlets or mail-outs, that type of thing. So there's really quite a wide breadth of public engagement out there. The question is then working into, depending on what our policy or programs or our initiatives are, is that extent to which the city is going to engage and what platforms.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, my comment is maybe leave this one alone as far as the amendments to the procedures until those kind of things are in place and it's solidified. And so therefore, because it does still allow us to come forward and maybe bring up things outside of the parameters of what's on the agenda. I know it delays things, but as you can see, we don't have a lot of people, so it doesn't delay it a whole lot. And so maybe that can be something that can be delayed just based on that until you do have something solid and concrete. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. So council, we are going to have, I am going to get our corporate officer just to review the report on procedures bylaw. So are there any more comments on the code of conduct portion? Okay, come on forward, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Good job. Councillor Douglas, it does specifically say, I just wanted to reaffirm this, that, and this is what I find strange with the code of conduct, thanks for clarifying it, is they encourage you to have one. Those that have a code of conduct are encouraged to look at ways of improving it. And it does say if you don't have a code of conduct, that's okay. I'm putting it pretty bluntly. And it says you can refer it off at 6 months after the new election, it has to be dealt with again. So sooner or later, it has to be dealt with. But I can't understand why they would try and rush you into do it in 6 months on an important document. I just want to clarify that. Other question is, what are the consequences facing a staff member, a senior staff member, or it could be a number of people in the system, our city council? What consequences are they facing if they're not adhering to these finalized codes of ethics? Very important question.
Thank you. I'll go to our CAO.
And I could also add into that the
Mr.
public as well.
Mr. Anderson.
The public as well.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our CAO for an answer to that question, and if you'd like to call on our consultant, he's welcome to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And through the chair, employees have employee contracts, and we deal with it through a process of coaching, training, mentoring, discipline. If somebody steps too far out of the boundaries, they always can be dismissed. Again, council, their only job is to make sure that I'm acting in accordance with what they believe. So the actual general populace of our employment field would be falling under my preview on that. And I would consult with lots of people, and we have lots of policies and procedures that we follow. But I wouldn't get into any specific scenarios on employees. But again, it would be up to me to make sure that I'm I'm following in the right action, and if council has questions about me and my performance, then they could talk to me about it.
And that's a given. You cannot discipline an elected person. There's a difference in that. And so if there's strong evidence that they have not adhered to the up-and-coming code of ethics, what are the consequences because they're elected by the people?
Through the chair, maybe I'll ask Mr. Barry to come up over to the side of the horseshoe.
Apparently
And, yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Go ahead, Mr. Barry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, these are excellent questions and exactly why council, I think, is considering moving to a committee of the whole for these kinds of discussions. So you hit on a very central point, Mr. Anderson. I listened carefully to your input, and I think that I and council that I heard in their discussions would agree with most of the things you're talking about. As you've correctly identified now, council can discipline staff if through their CAO if they consider it appropriate. Council can apply sanctions, of which there are some available, to deal with what are proven to be violations of the Code of Ethics, where council deems them to be violations. The trick, and probably goes to what I suspect you were asking for, is that if council itself doesn't agree, council is supreme. And so I'll give you an example that's not local government. The Prime Minister of Canada has twice been found guilty of ethical violations. But the Prime Minister of Canada controls the government. The same is true of council. And if you have a council that doesn't wish to abide by the rules, the province has not come to grips with the issue that council is supreme and the public decides. So you will have seen from your research that I was in Nanaimo.
Yes.
The Nanaimo Council had a code of conduct when all of those violations occurred.
Yes.
So what I'm telling you is that many of the things that I hear you asking for, I think council would agree, and I might agree, but your avenue is really to the province. They do not agree.
So at this point,
Thank you.
because there's no agreement, there is no solution to that problem then?
Absolutely there is, and it happens every 4 years at election time. And the public's actually quite smart.
True. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Hey, not seeing any more questions on the code of conduct piece, although we do have question period at the end of this. So if other questions do come up, you're welcome to come back up at the end. But I am going to move on to the council procedures bylaw amendment number 5082, 2023, for an overview of that portion from our corporate officer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. While I get my screen up here. So this, I think it might be best if I give kind of an overview of some of the changes that are coming with the bylaw that we have drafted right now. And I will caveat it with that these are drafted based on our discussions. In the same kind of realm as the code of conduct, these emerged as discussion at points with council, and the themes were around public input and how council uses public input within council meetings and committee of the whole meetings versus other opportunities for public input. And then also, as a branch of that, we also had some discussions around correspondence and how that was incorporated within our agendas versus operational items and how those are handled by staff or administration. So the first and kind of the primary pieces I think we've touched on, both for members of the public and council members here, is the way it's drafted is that public input periods where we used to have a section in the regular council meetings for public input and question period. We've moved those public input periods out and focused them into the committee of the whole. That leaves question periods in regular council meetings, and the way that the provisions are worded is where those agenda items that are on the agenda are the things that are able to be discussed in question period. Just as a focusing of business, because those are the reports that are in front of council that have been prepared by staff, and those are the staff that are prepared to answer to those items generally. And then within the committee of the whole section, truly the purpose of it is to kind of revamp the committee of the wholes a little bit, where there's more opportunities for delegations to come, for council to see a first opportunity to discuss items such as bylaws, especially things that do have broad public implications or citywide new programs, that type of thing. So it's an ability for council and the public to really see an item before it's adopted, before it's approved, and to have those opportunities to have input on those outside of any other public input periods that may happen. And then within that, in addition to having more delegations at those meetings, the way the provisions are drafted right now is that public input is still related to those items on the agenda, again, for those same reasons that those are the reports that are in front of council, those are the reports that have been prepared by staff, and that the staff that are present for those. That kind of summarizes the public input sections. The last section is around the correspondence and referrals, and it's really just a small change from what was currently in the bylaw. And it's really just where the previous bylaw said if it's an operational in nature, it can be, and it would be handled by administration, where practice had been anything addressed to council would be put on the agenda regardless of its operation in nature, or if it was relating to a council policy program or a council initiative. Where we've now moved it is to have it specified that those items that are operational in nature will be addressed to staff, referred to staff to answer those members of the public, so that we can move those responses along, ensure that the members of the public get a quick and timely response, and also keeping council informed, where those correspondence items that are received and responded to by staff are distributed regularly to council to see. And then if there are items within that correspondence that council wants to speak further to, that they can request those be added to an agenda. And then from there, I think what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Jerry Berry again to maybe talk about some of those governance principles again, and the best practices that were discussed within that workshop with council, just to kind of see where we came from, why this is drafted the way it is, and why it's sitting here.
Thank you, CAO.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to bring to the attention of council that I don't believe we read any of the motions or voted on them, so I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. I was going to wait because the conversation is very overlapping as the two are really related. I thought some of what we heard in the comments for this might relate to the code of conduct as well, so I thought we could do them both together if everyone's okay with that. Thank you. Mr. Berry, and I know you've spoken to some of this already, but if you have anything additional to add.
Madam Mayor, through you, yeah, just for clarification, council didn't have any preconceived ideas. We did a facilitation which largely involved a very simplistic method of going through various key elements and a spectrum. The issues were discussed, so democratic accountability and efficiency was discussed, public input versus mechanisms was discussed, a whole hierarchy of different spectrums, and council was invited to indicate where on the spectrum they stood. And as you can understand, there was some variation, but on the whole, the council indicated on those spectrums where they wish to stand. And as I say, the end result was a focus on public input and mechanisms to make that convenient, easy, but also authentic. Just back on Mr. Anderson's question, I'm reading from the second core principle of the International Association on Public Administration, public participation. And the second core principle is that public participation includes the promise that the public's contribution will influence the decision. And so that informs my comments through you, Madam Mayor, about leading the public to believe that council can be held accountable for items that the public may not agree with the decision. The only mechanism is at election time. And the last thing council or anyone wants to do in public participation is lead to false expectations. So that's an important point of clarification. Out of those various spectrum decisions, council chose to proceed with the items that you're seeing here today, and I'll just deal with the procedure bylaw. The major emphasis was to provide for a safe, informal, and more flexible opportunity for general public input through the Committee of the Whole, and to move the formal decision-making element more to the formal council meeting. And that's how council hoped to achieve the dual goals on opposite ends of the spectrum of increasing democratic accountability and simultaneously increasing decision-making efficiency and cost effectiveness for the taxpayers.
Thank you very much. I'll go to council first for questions. Are there any questions of our corporate officer or our consultant? Councillor Douglas.
Just one regarding, I think our corporate officer mentioned delegations, and I'm just wondering if, you know, with the moving of the, if we choose to do that, of the input session will allow for, you know, the potential for an additional delegation during our regular council meetings.
Corporate officer.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Currently, we didn't change any of the parameters around delegation. So how many are allowed, any time limits. Of course, if council would like to open that up to allow for more, we can absolutely make that change to either of the delegations allowed to regular council meetings or to Committee of the Whole.
I have to apologize, but I guess what I was trying to say is this shift may allow us to entertain more delegations within our council agenda.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to staff. So I'm just reading it here, and I just maybe need some clarification, and correct me if I'm wrong. So the new section 41 for the Committee of the Whole, approval agenda, adoption of minutes, delegations, public input period. And that will be the only public input period because there's not one going to be on the council meetings. So we go to number 42, it says member of the public may address council relations. Those items included on the meeting agenda or public hearing period. And it says number 4, speakers may not address items that are not on the agenda. So if we're eliminating the, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if we're eliminating the ability for a citizen to come here and ask questions not on, or just let's say painting the middle line on Gertrude is on somebody's mind, and it's not on the agenda in a council meeting, and it's not on the agenda in a public input period, but they want to come forward, is that something that they can speak on during the public input period?
Thank you. Great question. I'll go to our corporate officer.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The intent is, with some of those items, is to actually have the members of the public come forward as a delegation or in writing correspondence as well. Because council can still obviously take action on the correspondence pieces that they get. What it allows is, instead of having the member of the public come on that day without any staff reports prepared or any, maybe even staff present to discuss if needed, or even council to have that information in front of them, it basically just, it does slow that piece down for that individual to raise that concern at that meeting. But it does give them a larger platform to come forward as a delegation, as a member of the public to a Committee of the Whole to discuss it more broadly in front of council.
Thank you. I'll go to our CAO.
Thank you, and thank you for the question there. I think we also have to make sure that we're aware that for operational issues, the public can engage administration. And for something like line painting or fields, I've seen them do both, contact administration and individual councillors. So there are mechanisms, and if administration sees a big public presence coming forward on the issue, it would be wise for us to put it on the council agenda And vice versa, if council's getting a lot of questions on a specific thing, they would be, I'm guessing, asking us to put it on the agenda too, for the agenda review committee to make sure that something's on the agenda so we can speak to it. So then at the committee of the whole meeting, then you could tell the public which meeting it's at, and then we can have a fruitful conversation, because then we would make sure the people that are engaged in that subject are here. And plus, maybe we can bring some information forward on the particular issue. So again, there are mechanisms that are there, and I know that we've also talked about other types of engagement, where maybe for the financial plan, holding a public engagement in a more casual form to get ideas and generate things before we actually go into the public process on adopting the budget. And if we did that in later September, I know we've tossed around the idea here of having all the departments there, maybe council milling around to have that type of forum to even gain more public input. And maybe we'll get more than maybe 5 or 6 people out for this type of meeting in that setting where it's more of a discussion-based environment. So I just also want to say that this isn't the only means, as the corporate officer pointed out before. There are other ways that we can address making sure that we're garnering that public input. So just want to give that to council for information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think I would just add that this is, I think, the only piece that I've read specifically that I don't fully agree with. And so personally, I think I am going to listen to the conversation and questions, but I am going to suggest a change. And the reason that I'm not as supportive of this piece is that public input period does not require a response. In fact, we typically do not respond unless it's something very outside of the norm. So it's not a situation where a member of the public can come forward and we're not prepared to give an answer, because it's not a question and answer period. What I've seen public input period used for, and I think has been most not relevant, but helpful, is often a platform for community events that are going on, issues that people want to raise awareness to. And so it's often used as a way to get the message out for service groups or whatever is happening in the community, and that's been valuable. And then sometimes it is just that operational issue that we don't need to respond to because we don't have that information. However, it's an opportunity for staff to make that connection with the person who may not understand the process they need to go through, but might just jump to coming to a council meeting, and maybe that's what they know. Doesn't cause any harm if we don't have to provide an answer right away. So I think for me, that is an easy piece to keep, and it does serve a purpose in the community. But I think we've got some additional comments. I've got Councillor Mealy, then Councillor Solda, and Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I appreciate that. And I really appreciate that coming from the chair. Really, it means a lot. And it is like, yeah, I could come here today and say, hey guys, like, we didn't know, but there's a hockey game and the multiplex is open at 7:15, and but I mean the painting lines and all that was, but that's a great example of just giving the public the opportunity to come here and have their little moment to say, hey, we're doing this, we're doing that. It doesn't have to be, because not a lot of people will write it in on the Wednesday before and have a delegation and all that. So, and I am very encouraged that the chair recognizes that. So thank you, Madam Mayor. That makes me feel good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mealy. Councillor Solda.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can see where there's members of Madam Mayor that are frustrated, that write letters to City Council and they don't see it on the agenda. So then it goes to, because the staff has to answer the questions. I understand that when we get correspondence in, we go, well, we need more background information, so take it to staff. And staff goes and comes back and has the answer. And what's interesting is the rest of the public, that have not attended the meetings, know what's going on. So there's frustration now because it's not going to be handled that way. So it goes to procedure, it goes to staff. They deal with it. They send the letter writer, the author of the letter, the answer, but nobody knows what it was all about. And so we could have 10 letters like that where we just need to answer only one. And I think it's frustrating for me in the fact that I'd like to see the letter too. I mean, I do see it, but I'd like to see the answer. And I know there's letters that coming back with answers and stuff that we haven't seen. And so do you follow where I'm going with that? It's really frustrating because the rest of the public want to see it. And the letter author would like the rest of the public to see it too. So I'm just bringing that forward.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask our corporate officer to comment on, because a portion of what you just said was that you want to see the letter and want to know that it's being responded to. And so outside of this process, we do have a process for CCing council.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, just, and this is a new process that we are still working through some of the kinks, of course, and also, you know, educating the public and notifying them that there is this change occurring. So the idea is that those operational correspondence items that come to staff are then still collected by the corporate services team. It's identified by whatever department is responsible to respond. We then provide that letter to that department, and they are to give us the reply that they give to that individual. And then in our correspondence log and what we provide council is that original correspondence that was received from the member of the public, plus that response with it. And then that is what the council will see in their package. It should be both the response and the initial request. And then from there, if those items are of something that council feels that should be brought to broader council attention or in front of committee of the whole or regular council meeting, then that request can be made that be added to an agenda.
Thank you. And that is for items, letters that are written that are operational in nature. Anything that is regarding council business will continue to come to council on a council agenda as it always has. Thank you. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Given the conversational nature of this meeting, which I really appreciate and I think is very productive, I have some comments, not necessarily questions. But I have comments on both the items, the Code of Conduct and the Procedures Bylaw. The Code of Conduct is for council. It is for council to hold council accountable. It is somewhat a reiteration of the oath of office that all of council takes. And if someone was to read the two side by side, you might say that one is a further explanation of the first. And both of those exist so that council can hold council accountable. And now we have another tool with some examples to remind us of how we should be behaving towards each other and towards the public. We are binding ourselves here. We're not binding the public. We're not binding staff. There are in existence a multitude of other laws and rules and opportunities and offices, etc., that can do that. So depending upon whomever you have a concern about, there is an appropriate place to go. The Code of Conduct is not it for everything. It is it for council. The procedure, bylaws procedure, is different. It is to be used as a tool for everyone. It provides, I think, some valuable structure for the chair in running meetings of any sort. The council meetings, the committee of the whole meetings, public hearings, etc. There is a tool for council to use to be able to focus on the business of the city. And it should also be a tool for the public to use to clarify the abilities to engage with the cities. Now, we did speak at our session quite at length about both of these because they are interactive. And with regards to the Code of Conduct, I'm actually quite satisfied with the way it's turned out. There certainly is room for new ideas and changes to be made to it. And I note that it does not have enforcement clauses. And personally, I'm in favor of that, of not having enforcement clauses. Because I find, at least from my prior experience in life and in my professional life, that enforcement rarely results in compliance and most often just gets us off track as to what the real issues are. So I would hate to be in a debate about painting lines on Gertrude Street and get distracted from that because somebody spoke out of turn and we get into a long argument about speaking out of turn and not the lines on Gertrude Street. So as the Code of Conduct stands, I commend the staff for their presentation and their report, and it's something that I fully support in the form that it's been presented. With regards to the procedures bylaw, I would also like to commend staff for their work and their report. And the intent of the changes that have been proposed I would simply say that I think that the intent of our discussions was fully captured. I'm not sure that the mechanism that has been created to reach that intent is as effective as it could be. And for that reason, I think that the procedures bylaw is something that perhaps could benefit from further discussions with council and staff, because staff really are the experts in the area anyways, and possibly should be referred to some other type of meeting or research or a further committee of the whole meeting so that there could be more discussion on it. The intent that I see in the procedures bylaw is to increase public consultation. And I am not a historian of the city, so I'm not going to speak to past administrations. When I got here in 1995, I was much more interested in pursuing a active nightlife than I was in seeing what the city was doing. But along the way, I do note that Councillor Douglas, under a different administration, was responsible, amongst all of his other successes, in creating a public input period. And that increased public engagement. I note that Mayor Minion's worship was successful in a previous administration, as I'm led to believe, in introducing Committee of the Wholes, which is an increase in public engagement. And I also note that Councillor Douglas again was successful, but a few short weeks ago, in suggesting that we have electronic engagement in our meetings. And that, I will say, in my point of view, was a success because it occurred with one person. But it occurred, and it's a pathway that we're along to increasing this engagement. So we have tools, and we also have to be skilled artisans in using the tools. And that's why this is a living document and a living process that we will proceed along. We can look to the past and see that we have gained, and we can look to the future and hope that those gains provide further gains in the future. It's kind of like being a skilled sculptor. A skilled sculptor doesn't create the sculpture, they merely remove the excess stones so that we can see the creation underneath. And that's what I think we should be moving towards. I think the procedures bylaw needs a little bit more removed. There's a few earlobes that are maybe a little lengthy. So with regards to the procedures bylaw, I am fully in favor of removing the public input period from the the council meetings. And the purpose of that is because the council meetings are truly for the purposes of focusing on the business of the city in the sense of making the decisions, writing the bylaws, moving things ahead. I personally think that the question period should be prior to any decision making, not subsequent to it, because I think if we are going to take questions from the public and value that, that it'd be better to hear the public's opinion before we make a decision instead of forcing the public into a situation where the only question that they can ask is, why the heck did you do that? So those would be my suggestions. So removing the public input period, I think, is a good idea, and reinforcing it in the committee of the whole procedure would be a good idea. I am a little concerned, and perhaps with further discussion, we can correct some of these situations and have a better model going forward before we actually pass the bylaw. Because I would be concerned about removing an opportunity for engagement without first replacing it with something else. And I would actually suggest that if there is any doubt in whether or not a new plan is going to work, we should add in before we remove, so that we can be sure that the adding in is effective. I did have a discussion earlier on with another individual about how the cow is used, the committee of the whole is used, and that in fact it is one of those tools that we can be better artisans at using. The committee of the whole structure is used differently in many different municipalities, and it certainly can be expanded, used in ways that we may not have considered yet, so that there is more effective public input in a committee of the whole than there currently is. And I'm not suggesting it should be a town hall type meeting, but town hall meetings were mentioned in this report. They were not suggested to be put in. And I'm not suggesting that we do necessarily put them in as part of the bylaw, but I am suggesting that through further discussion, we could examine the benefits of town halls and see where they can be incorporated into the committee of the whole. I also think that the bylaw should include all possible opportunities for public input, and I would join Councillor Solda in her comments with regards to letters. Again, with a council meeting, we don't need to reread every letter that's sent to the city, because that does detract from the business and the focus of doing city work. In committee of the whole, or also simply for public information's sake, those letters are important because public discourse generates public discourse. And that's what engagement is. It's not about an individual telling council what their problem is. It's about council and the entirety of the community coming together as closely as we can to one communal agreement, so that we represent the will of the population, and the population understands that even if they disagree, they understand the direction that we're all going in. So I think those letters should be included in some way or another. I really like the system that staff has come up with how the letters are communicated to council at the moment. It's a very good system. We get the letters, we get the responses, we know what's going on. I think that level of information sharing should somehow, and I'm not sure how, but somehow include public access as well. I don't know if that's through the website or just attaching it to the agenda. I know that a lot of what gets attached to the agenda really ends up in just being a way that public's informed, and I think that agendas are valuable for that. I think I'm almost at the end, but no, yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think those are, except for all sorts of flowery, poetic references to analogies about why we should do this. That's essentially what I have to say, and I really would like to congratulate staff for their efforts in this matter, and I really would encourage council to take an opportunity to maybe take just one more stab at the procedures bylaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Patola. I did just want to follow up on one comment you made, because you referenced bringing the procedures bylaw forward, possibly for more information. So I did just want to clarify if there is specific additional information that you would like to see staff look at or research or bring forward to us. And if there is nothing right now, that's fine, but I just wanted to put that out there because it's more functional to come forward if we have specific requests as to what we would like staff to bring.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hope that I referred to it properly in my comments and that they were clear with regards to the structuring of the question period, the public input period, and the amount of the public input period. The amount of public input, perhaps I should stress more. I note that right now it amounts to 4 speakers for 3 minutes each, 3 times a month, which is 36 minutes of public input. And to restrict it to only the committee of the whole meetings, we'd be dropping it down to 12 minutes of public input a month. I think that we could somehow arrange a structure that would allow for a little more than 12 minutes a month.
Okay, thank you. So certainly understand your comments on that. I was just looking for if there was any additional reports or references from other communities, but it sounds like there's not, just possible changes for discussion. Thank you. Councillor Solda and then Councillor Douglas. Okay, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick ideas, possibly. I wanted to say, first of all, like we have two recommendations here, relating to the code of conduct and the council procedures. Both of those recommendations I'm perfectly happy with. But I would like to make a couple of comments just to clarify any questions that might come up. And I gather, this has kind of been said before, but I'd just like to confirm this is my way of looking at this as well, is that council meetings are business meetings where we need to make decisions and move on. And so that's why I see the movement and the shifting of content here to be a good thing and a good direction. From what I remember, we introduced the Committee of the Whole in about 2015, around there. And prior to that, we had all these separate committees that made recommendations individually, and then they all made their way to council at different times. And so now we have the Committee of the Whole that does that. And I think that's a perfect venue for this public input period to be at. And it is a more flexible, as you can see here tonight, we're talking a little bit more, and Mr. Anderson's, talking about how useless I am because I've only done one worthwhile thing in my life, which was public input period. And I'm kidding, of course. But I think that's a really good shift to make our council meetings more of a business-oriented meeting, and then our COW to be a little more flexible, and to have that public input space and have it very well defined what it's for. And I also agree completely with the questions being linked to matters that have been under consideration in that one council meeting. And one of the things too that I think we need to highlight to the community is that over the years it's become fairly common practice, and I think it's a misplaced practice, for people to come with their issues to a counselor who they just happen to run into at Quality Foods or out on the street and say, hey, about the painted line on the road is getting faded. But that's become a little too common. And really, if we're functioning well, and a past city manager, the Honorable Jim Sawyer, taught me this, is that if the city is functioning well, as it should be, a citizen should be able to contact City Hall, walk into City Hall if they wish, and have that issue addressed by the city staff. There should be no need to interact with councilors if we're functioning well. And that's the place where we should get to, I believe. So, if people have an issue with something in the community that's more administration oriented, we have to make sure that our staff are ready, willing, and I believe they are, and solution-based, to come up with these issues. The one thing I would like to suggest as part of our recommendation, and this kind of helps, I think, the public input period, is to have some sort of wording within that procedural bylaw, if it's appropriate, that would refer to, we've had in the past coffee and tea with city council, sort of like a movable meetings, maybe meetings at the school, in the theater, or some changed venues. Just some things that could change it up a bit and have the ability of the public and the council and the staff to interact in a different venue, and the public would be more comfortable coming up and walking to me. And I think if we can add some of that, and I think there's an appetite on council for doing something along those lines, maybe quarterly or a couple times a year, have some events like that might bring back a little bit of the informality that also helps us function, really well. And I'd like to applaud staff and council for the way that we're going on this. I think we're going in a very good direction.
Thank you. And I think to summarize our corporate officer's comments from earlier, there are other ways that we engage with the public, open houses, for instance, that may not be written into our procedures bylaw because these are for formal meetings of council and committee of the whole, but still will take place. So I think, the coffees and that type of thing don't need to fall under this bylaw. However, agreed that there is an appetite on council for those events to take place. Councillor Mealy and then Councillor Dame.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would it now be a good time for a specific recommendation from myself on these? Because it's right on the board right there. What my recommendation would be is 42-4 to remove the words items that are not on the agenda. And so it would read, speakers may not address items that refer to concluded public hearings such as the one we had yesterday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Corporate Officer, could you just comment if you'd like us to make the actual recommendation that is, and then make an amendment to it? That's best process.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, since there really isn't a resolution or a recommendation, on the floor at this point, if the committee would like to make that recommendation with a specific provision or more removed from the draft bylaw for next presentation, absolutely, I would, you can make that recommendation.
Thank you. So go ahead, Councillor Mealy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would make the recommendation, is a motion I gather at this point. I would like to move that number 42.4, that we take out the words items that are not on the agenda.
Thank you. As our seconder. Seconded by Councillor Patola. Thank you. We do still have public input before, and I think we'll do that before we vote on anything tonight. But thank you for that. So that is on the floor now, and I'll go to Councillor Dame.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A lot's been said, and so I don't intend to just repeat the same points again. I do agree with almost everything that has been said here. I just want to reiterate to the members of the public that are here that these changes are not, they're not for the purpose of limiting public engagement. This is to put all things in their most appropriate place. And as has been already pointed out, council meetings are not the ideal place for extensive community engagement. But having said that, there is a strong desire from this council in creating and emphasizing effective pathways for the community to engage. And I don't know if this proposal, this isn't necessarily the place to communicate exactly how we intend to do that, but I think that maybe we could be, I think communication is going to be very important as we explore these various meetings, as we look into these different pathways, because the natural reaction, and it's totally understandable, is going to be to focus on what's being taken away. And I think we need to really make sure that people can see what specifically we are providing for them to reach the city, reach us, have input, have their say. We truly do want to hear that. And so perhaps with our recommendations, we could include some sort of communication plan that is created to inform the public of the new options or the existing options that maybe are being underutilized. I just think that that's going to be a very important aspect of this because it doesn't help to have these methods if the public aren't aware of them or feel comfortable using them. So I think that that's going to really be an important aspect of making this function properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And could I just go to our corporate officer to confirm if that motion that was brought forward was to move the recommendation and amend it, or just specifically to delete that portion? And I believe it was just specifically to delete the portion. Okay, wonderful. So just wanted to make sure I understand that correctly. If that's the case, I think we can speak to that specifically and then vote on it. It's not to do with the whole procedures bylaw, so we can still welcome public up after that, and we can make further amendments if needed. So are there any other comments on specifically deleting section 42.4?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to reiterate that it's on the public input period, which will be potentially taken out of the council meetings. This is talking about the committee of the whole and just allowing that forum to continue.
Thank you. And that is to allow the forum to continue in that you'd be able to speak to any. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Everyone on council clear? Wonderful. Councillor Douglas.
No, I just wanted to make sure it's clear. So the proposal for the public input period originally was that speakers would not address items that weren't on the agenda. Okay, and what Councillor Mealy is suggesting is removal. Good,
Correct.
thank you.
So this doesn't impact whether or not it is shifted from one meeting to the other. This is specifically just opening up public input period in the proposal to allow members of the public to speak to public events or Bulldogs games or anything else specifically that they may want to come forward and speak to. Okay, not seeing any further comments on that. On the motion, all in favor? I think we have Councillor Haggard still.
I'm still thinking. Can I just get a clarification, Madam Mayor? Was
Absolutely,
this-
Councillor Haggard.
I don't have the agenda in front of me. Is this for the committee of the whole or is this for council meetings?
Thank you, Councillor Haggard. So this is not speaking to which meetings public input period would occur at. It is specifically speaking to the terms around public input period, meaning that you would still be able to speak to any item that you want. If the next motion is passed, which I know we have members of the public who would like to speak prior to that happening, and that would be for the procedures bylaw to be recommended to council to move forward for 3 readings, that would then effectively shift public input period to the committee of the whole meetings.
Okay, I'm opposed.
Okay, thank you.
If I'm
Motion
understanding
carried.
it correctly, I'm not sure if I'm understanding.
Thank you, Councillor Haggard. Okay, council, are there any other comments before we go to input from the public? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Solda, you did have your hand up prior.
So I just want to make a comment about why the public comes to council, to a council member. And I think it's important that they should be able to come to a council member, and I know we're not taking that privilege away. When people come and talk to me, it's because they don't know what to do at City Hall, how to get there and what door and stuff like that, and what's the procedure. So that is really important. We need to be better at communicating. Here's what you do when you walk in, do a video, open the door, come up here and say hi, or they're afraid, they find it very intimidating. The other thing is, the biggest thing is frustration with someone at City Hall. They're frustrated, they've been at City Hall, they don't know, now what do I do? Because I'm not getting something that I'm asking for. So they come and talk to you, or you just actually walk in a grocery store. And my daughter hates going with me because I'm 2 hours later out of a grocery store. But the whole thing is, there is no problem for someone to come and talk to us, for me anyways. And I can see frustration and I direct them. If they send me an email as an individual council, I normally forward it to all of council, or I forward it to our CAO and to our corporate director so they can do what they have to do with it and forward it on. But I do let the person know that I have forwarded their email and they will have a response back from staff. So that is what I do, and I will continue to do that, and everybody else can do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there has been one change made to the recommendations so far. We are going to welcome members of the public to come forward and speak. Recommendations have not been passed for the procedures bylaw as a whole or for the code of conduct. So the intent would be that those would come forward if a member of council would like to make those motions after we hear from members of the public. Mr. Smith.
Don't go away, Councillor Douglas. I just wanted to thank you for Coffee with the Mayors. That was a very good initiative as well. So to clarify the public input, the discussion is going to remove public input from regular council meetings and only have it at committee of the whole meetings. Is that where everybody's going?
The proposal, yes, removes it from regular meetings of council, shifts it to committee of the whole, leaves delegations, and leaves question period.
At regular council meetings?
Correct.
Delegations, and okay. How about a friendly amendment that you leave public input at regular council meetings, but you put it to the back of the meeting where question period is. Because some of the language in here, in this draft bylaw, if I get my right sentence, on page 18, the most significant changes are to use of public input periods and question periods to focus on items on the agenda for the meeting so that council's engagement and decision-making can be focused on the business of the day and council's strategic priorities. I'm not sure that when someone from the public asks a question at the conclusion of the meeting after council has already engaged in discussion and made decisions, how a question asked at the end of the meeting could possibly have an impact before council had their engagement and discussion. That doesn't make sense. How that could impact anything that council has already done, and why then questions that are not related to items on the agenda cannot be asked. Because tonight, or if this was a 2 o'clock meeting, you've got 150 or so employees just in the city of Port Alberni. Some will not see these meetings until they get home. So if they've got a question, or their spouse has a question, or their neighbor, when they come to the next meeting and the topic discussed at the previous meeting is not on the next agenda, how do they ask that question?
Thank you for that question. I will go to our CAO and possibly to our consultant if he'd like to address it.
I think I've got your intent, but I may need to pass a little bit over to Jerry Berry, but I'll take a crack. So through the chair, thanks for the question. I believe that the questions are about the process at the council meeting, and the resolutions were made, and at a committee of the whole, the questions would be dealt with in a different manner. That's my take on it at first blush on this, but I'll refer to our consultant.
So, Madam Mayor, I understood. I'm sorry. Thank you. I understood the question about the point that questions would be asked. And I think that point was made by Councillor Patola, and he was advocating for moving it prior, and that's a legitimate argument. That's what I heard you ask. In terms of public input, it's entirely up to council how they make the transition from teenager to adult here and what their adulthood looks like. But there is a function of size. So to use other analogies, once a matter gets on the floor of the House in Ottawa, you can ask all the questions you want. You can have all the input you want. That's where the decision is taken. That's the element. So the point has been made many times that the opportunity here is to provide adequate public input at the gestation phase, rather than when it's too late in the bylaw phase. And if questions were, for instance, moved forward, that gives it an opportunity for, well, what is happening at the birth? To have that input at gestation, I just take council back to where, because I think the Director of Corporate Services did a good job of capturing the issue for council at the time. It's inconceivable to me, people are reading the literal wording, but it's inconceivable to me that if 10 people showed up at a committee meeting for input, that the chair and the council wouldn't allow it, regardless of what the bylaw says. The intent was never to restrict the opportunities. In fact, I think council would be delighted if 20 people showed up. They'd be delighted if all those people at work were actually going to watch the meeting. That'd be awesome. And I often in my career would say to people, they'd say, well, I didn't find out from council what was happening. Well, that's usually not the best place to find out what was happening. We've talked about other mechanisms. The intent that was tried to be captured by the Director of Corporate Services was, what about perceived frustrations for people coming to council? At the time of the facilitation, there was a case where someone came to council at the public input phase and made a request that required significant council involvement and input previously. So they got thrown back. And one of my contemporaries, very famous in Canada, he has a statement that is first heard, referred. because there's a whole bunch of information and items that need to be included. So the intent was not to restrict input in any way, has been meant. The intent was not to limit numbers. A number has to be put in there for some reason, or perhaps not. Perhaps the wording is indelicate. The intent was to avoid filibustering, if potential, which has happened in many other municipalities, and to avoid someone's frustration when finding out, well, you mean I could have gone to staff 4 weeks ago and I waited for council and now I've asked and now they've sent me back to staff. And that was a case in point at the time. So I don't know if that helps you, but the council really was well-intended in trying to capture how they could meet these competing objectives, one of which was taxpayer, efficient use of taxpayer resources. So let me use a private sector type analogy. If the item wasn't on the agenda at your menu, you probably have little success on a Sunday night going to phone the manager. You'd go to the cook at the time and see what could happen. And that's part of the efficiency piece here. The expectation in the past where council members can facilitate those things, and I agree that you have a role. But as was already mentioned, a better role would be but those issues that are operational get dealt with at the operational level. You wouldn't, for instance, want to wait when you call the fire department for the council to have a meeting. That's an extreme example. Extreme and ridiculous example. But this is what council's weighing with. Where do you draw the line? Even on correspondence, I would argue that moving to a system where all correspondence gets sent to council isn't respectful of council's time or the taxpayers' dollars. If there were an item that was significantly important that council needed to know, there's mechanisms to deal with that. But the system which sends everything and then we'll pick what percent might actually be of intent, it causes a lot of difficulties, one of which is having all the senior staff here all the time in case anything happens. There's a cost to that. So those are all the various values that council was trying, your worship, to deal with.
Thank you very much. Councillor Solda. Oh, I thought you had your hand up. Okay. Mr. Smith, do you have an additional question?
So to be clear, because I want to understand how question period is going to work after this procedures bylaw is passed. At a regular council meeting, myself or any other member of the public who wishes to attend here, if it's a question that they have that is not specific to the items discussed at the council meeting on that date, are they able to ask that question? Because they might be following up on a process that started last week, last month. In some cases, there's infrastructure programs that have been going on for years in the city. Are they not going to be permitted to pursue that at question period?
Thank you. Did you want to take that?
Madam Mayor, in my experience, and you've seen that the mayor's chair has been very generous tonight. In my experience, if it's a valid question that is useful for council to consider, it will be allowed, regardless of what the procedure bylaw says. There's many other municipalities where it is abused. I can tell you, I know of a circumstance where a gentleman would come to council every Monday and he would say, why haven't you done this today? And the answer every meeting would be, it's not in the agenda. You've had 8 hours today to ask the question. Would you please ask staff? Because we would have had this dealt with 4 hours ago. That's what it's intended to deal with. Inconceivable to me, and maybe the wording can be improved upon, but the intent is not, if there were a question that was of importance to council, I would expect council will hear it.
Okay, but that's a bit of an extreme example, and I think that this is a smaller town, and we sort of all see each other on the street. And I think that this council knows that the people generally who come here aren't going to ask the same question every week, that they're going to have different questions. So to put a blanket statement in there that restricts the public's ability to ask a question on an issue or an item that is important to them, I don't think should be included in the bylaw. And I want to be clear where the committee's mind is on this, because while the committee or council may be uncomfortable or not necessarily want to have the questions or maybe even answer a question at sometimes, that's fine. That's council's prerogative not to answer a question of the public. It's your right. But I don't want my right or anybody else's right to ask a question to be taken away from me. That's a tenet of democracy. And while the questions might not have anything to do with the meeting today, they may have, it might be a question of your neighborhood, of some other issue that's going on in the city. And I know I want to retain that right to come here. It's always nervous being up here, but I want to retain that right. That you have every right to say, Mr. Smith, we are not going to answer that tonight, and I have to respectfully yield to the chair and go back to my seat. But I don't want my right to ask the question to be taken away in a bylaw from the peers that we elected to council. I don't want that to happen. I'm going to be very clear on that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Anything additional to add, either on clarification from our corporate officer or from Jerry? No? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. As you know, this is not adopted, so certainly we'll take them into consideration and we'll go to additional speakers for the evening, unless there's any comments here. I didn't see any hands up. Oh, sorry, Councillor Dame.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Smith. In trying to balance the intention of keeping public meetings more, I think, focused, council meetings more focused, public meetings is maybe too general, speaking to council meetings. I wonder if maybe the solution is to allow also topics that that were on the previous agenda, and at least you would have an opportunity to bring things from a former meeting. And in addition to that, we've already discussed the intention of adding some form of alternate or additional meeting where there would be a more open forum of discussion. I think that the intention of this is to make sure that we stay on track with the intended business that's being brought to council. But I totally see your point. And I agree that it makes sense that questions will come up from a previous meeting. So perhaps there's a provision that could be made for the previous agenda to still be fair game for the following meeting. And then, like I said, and then an additional meeting that's more of an open forum. So just a thought. I don't know if that's something to consider.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Haggard and then Councillor Mealy and Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just going to backtrack a little bit and apologize to you and to council and to the community. I wasn't really clear what we were voting on the last recommendation. So I went and grabbed another laptop and I was reading it, and I do agree with the motion. When I voted opposed, I do agree with it. So I just want to clarify that and apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haggard. I know it's can be challenging participating electronically. Councillor Mealy and then Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and yeah, thank you, Councillor Harder. I kind of felt in the back of my mind that you were going to support it, so it was just a matter of reading it, that's all. So, and I just want to say, just on question period, I think I'd like to give kudos to Councillor Portola. I think I agree those question periods should be at the start of the meeting, at least, so that if there is something on the agenda, it can be questioned and talked about ahead of time, and then give the public their opportunity to have their say before we make our decision. So I just wanted to say I back that part.
Thank you. And I just want to note on that I think it's important maybe for us to give consideration to what the intent of question period is. Is it to inform our decisions, or is it to get clarification on the decisions that we've made? And those are two very different things. I think that what was discussed as kind of best practice was that items of significance would start at a committee of the whole, where there would be an opportunity for members of the public to provide input to those items, to ask questions at that meeting. Then additionally, of course, the whole original intent of committee of the whole was for those items to then have time before they come to council to get voted on, where in that period of time, usually weeks, we would hear from members of the public through the various ways that we do hear from members of the public. We might receive letters, we might bump into people in the grocery store, we might see a storm of comments on social media, but it slows that process down in order to give us the opportunity to hear that input. So I feel, I think that, based on the conversation and based on how question period has been used in the past, that the intent of question period is for members of the public to get clarification of decisions that were made, to ask follow-ups, and not necessarily to shift our decisions on those on those decisions that we've made. Items of significance, if we are using committee of the whole in, I would say, the way that we are intending to here, there would have been ample opportunity for members of the public to shift our decision-making and maybe shape that policy or process prior to it getting to the point where we're ready to adopt it. Opportunities like this, where we may make changes. So that's just my take on that. I don't personally agree with moving it to the beginning of a meeting. I've seen specifically, actually very recently at the regional district, a conversation where we had members of the public come speak at the beginning to something that had not had a report from staff verbalized yet. We had a very unproductive conversation because members of the public were very upset, were asking questions, were providing input into something that clarification and explanation from staff had not been provided. Then members of the board started asking questions. It was completely ineffective. At the end of the meeting, we had more conversation where after that staff report had come forward, council questions people had the opportunity to ask them. There was a very different conversation when it was informed. So I think it would be challenging to have a staff report on the agenda and have questions prior to. I think it's less productive. So it just depends how we intend to use question period, and that's a topic of conversation tonight and in the future. Councillor Douglas and then Councillor Patola.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say I agree about the shifting of question period. And I just wanted to mention, and I may have missed this when I slipped out of the room there so that I couldn't hear your praise. From what I recollect in around 2016, prior to that, question period also required that the questions relate to the proceedings of that meeting. It was in about 2016 that was changed and removed.
2015.
In that area. And then, so what we're doing is we're trying to go back to a model that's more business-oriented now. And from what I recall, my honorable citizen, Mr. Smith, you didn't have any difficulty approaching the council meetings during that period with extremely important and well-worded questions, and played a very significant role in our community, as you continue to do so. So I think we're moving in a good direction here as far as just refining what question period relates to and shifting the emphasis on flexibility and informality to the committee of the whole format. And that's how I see this in my sort of judgment. So I'd just like to add that, and really appreciate you coming here and adding your wisdom to the conversation. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
The other thing I wanted to add, if I could, and I might get a bit of heat for this, but we are having a conversation here of sorts. This question period to me would go something like this in a business format. Okay, so you're at the podium. I say, Mr. Smith, I understand you have some questions. How many questions do you have? You'd say, for example, I have 3 questions. I'd say, okay, what's your first question? And you'd give it to me, I'd write it down. And your second question, I'd write it down. And your third question, we'd write it down. Say, well, if I'm able to answer any of those questions at the moment, we will. Otherwise, we'll get back to you within 1 week to follow up on those questions, and thank you very much for your questions. That's how I would see question period. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate, Mr. Smith, I appreciate your desire to not only test council by fire, but also to keep that fire roaring and be able to come back in consecutive weeks and not be restricted by what the agenda is, but to keep your point being pressed until you're satisfied. And I think every citizen should have that ability. When I first got into government many years ago, I worked at the FOI department when FOI was a new thing, weeks old. And back in that day, the concept was anything was an FOI request. You could approach your minister on the street and say, hey, I want to know about all the records you got on when you take people out to the bar. And that was an FOI request. That openness has been reduced in FOI, but I understand the concept, and I certainly personally support the concept of being able to engage through multiple manners, whether it be by letter, electronically, at a meeting when you ask questions, at a meeting when you raise a point of interest. But I think we are beginning to confabulate now. So these comments aren't to you anymore, Mr. Smith, they are to everyone. I think we're beginning to confabulate what I referred to as having tools and being good artisans with two different tools. And we are worried about a hammer that we have in our hand that can't put a screw in the wall. And then we are worried about a screwdriver in our hand that's really useless driving nails into boards. So we should, I think, not be recommending this procedure today. We should be returning for more discussion, and we should be focusing on the purposes of each type of meeting. And I kind of said I wasn't going to use analogies, but this is my analogy. The committee of the whole meeting, as Madam Mayor pointed out, was created to make more time, to give a buffer, to slow things down. And it's the time when the train is in the station. It's not moving fast. There's time not only to get on the train, but also to load all your luggage on the train and say goodbye to people that aren't getting on the train. So that's the time when letters are an appropriate form of engagement, when coming and asking questions is a appropriate form of engagement, and nothing's going to be decided right there because we're not in a rush to decide. We are in a slow contemplative process where all of this input is taken in and valued, as we are legislative required to do. It shouldn't be a show. We're not here just to listen to you and then ignore you. We are here to listen to you, period, and be influenced by those opinions and insights, knowledge that you have that I may not have. So we really need to work more on the structure of the committee of the whole, not have only 12 minutes of input in it, and really facilitate that input when the train is not moving fast, when it's moving slow. There's a point where it starts moving out of the station, and you can still run and jump on. But there's a point when it's left the station, that it's barreling along the tracks, and very hard to stop, very hard to change its direction. And that really is the council meeting, because all the input has been taken, has been considered, and now we're just at the point of the business procedural part of the process. I would be as concerned as you are, and I fully agree with your concerns, that should we only be rushing the train along and trying to jump on when it's already going over a trestle at 120 kilometers an hour, that would be a disaster. And whatever input or ideas you might be able to provide will certainly be lost under the wheels of that train. And so if council was to pass the amended procedures bylaw as it stands, I fear that we may be doing away with all the stations and limiting ourselves to the passengers that are on the train right now. And in that view, that's why I believe we should be undertaking some further discussion and further thought about crafting a appropriate, all-inclusive, or as inclusive as possible council of the whole procedure that will guarantee those opportunities which you've expressed you value so highly. And then once that is completed, we can leave what's left over, the mere basics, for the business meeting or the council meeting, as it were. I hope that's of some assistance.
Thank you very much. It does. So I think that there are a few different ways, and any member of the committee, of course, will have the opportunity at any point tonight to make the recommendation if they choose. Somebody could also recommend by motion or recommendation that it gets deferred to an additional committee of the whole if somebody would like to. If this goes to a council meeting, there is of course still time to make amendments and changes to it. It is recommended that it, or the recommendation is laid out currently, that it moves to a council meeting for 3 readings. That of course would give opportunity to amend as well, and then to go to an additional meeting. Councillor Patola.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I see Mr. Smith is still standing at the podium. I don't want to cut him off if he has further input to add, but if he does not, I would like to make a motion that the second item under staff reports, Council Procedures Amendment Bylaw, be deferred to another committee of the whole meeting, the next committee of the whole meeting.
Thank you. That's moved by Councillor Patola, seconded by Councillor Solda, and we could vote on that right now if there is not additional comments, but I think I'll actually, if council's okay with it, go to the public for more comment prior to that.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so not seeing additional comments from council. Mr. Smith, do you have additional comments?
I do. So you addressed one of the issues is that if we're going to take this out of the regular council meetings, which really reduces the public input time, of course, in order to have an adequate number of committee of the whole meetings, what's proposed, what's council's or the committee's mind of how many meetings a year, once a month, may not be enough. Maybe it is enough. Maybe we got to sort of figure that out. Because with respect to the Director of Corporate Services earlier saying that if someone brings an issue and staff aren't prepared and then we have to delay and it delays it for 2 weeks. The flip side is if you only have committee of the whole meetings once every 4 or 6 weeks, that in itself presents a long delay for someone who's trying to get something before their elected representative. So it might take a little bit of discussing there to sort out what that may look like. And I appreciate there's not going to be a perfect model for everybody, but it's just that we are really eliminating a lot of that public input time, which I think is valuable, and it is an ability for members of the public to bring issues that the council and or staff may not be aware of. But the real clarification was on question period and the ability to come here and to make sure that we were not prevented from following up on issues that were raised even at previous meetings. And actually on this one as well, I agree with Chair Minions that it is both ways. If you ask a question at the beginning, are you going to have another question period at the end of the meeting? Because very often, the business of council is actually what inspires the questions in the first place, which then in itself, if you're able to, if you're at work or you're out of town and you watch this meeting, you can come to a subsequent meeting and ask that question of the business of council from the previous meeting. So I really want to be clear on that. And with respect to public engagement, this is absolutely a frustration of my friend Mr. Anderson's. It's been a frustration of mine. This is actually quite a ways along the road. You guys had this discussion on March 23rd. We're at the end of April, and it's in an agenda now. And I know that we elect council to represent the public, but there's all kinds of situations where various user groups, when a community initiative or some projects going on, you'll have First Nations partners, industries, nonprofits, government officials, community members at large. And I think, and I 100% agree with Mr. Anderson, it's my view as well, you guys are trying to thread a needle on being a council and doing council business, and at the same time, being our voice. And I think that at the very beginning of these sessions, whether you do it by lottery or something, that you have 1 or 2 or 3 members of the public to sit in and if they have to sign an NDA or whatever it is, so they're not coming out. But I think that is an important part of allowing the public to be at least a little bit involved from the beginning, instead of trying to catch up to the train that's left the station. And I know it's been a frustration, honestly, of mine, is that you find out things and it's so far away. And out of respect to the board, you've done a lot of work on this stuff, which I appreciate. And on a human level, when you start getting questioned on it, the human nature is, you guys don't understand, we've done all this work, why don't you appreciate what we're doing? Or you don't understand this, you don't understand that. But if you brought the public in just a little bit earlier, I think it would tamp that down a little bit. So that might be a suggestion for other initiatives that you're going to do. That, I mean, I realize there's some with respect to certain legal and that perhaps you can't, but this is a change of procedures to how the public is going to interact with their local government, that someone from our side, I'm not saying that there's two sides, but to a degree there is, there should have been representation. And I think that when you embark on one of these initiatives again, that should be a consideration. And that's all for right now.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Smith.
Chair Muniz.
Okay. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak today? Come on forward.
Sorry, just for clarification, again, for the public input, I'd love to see them, and like you said, it only takes 4 speakers 3 minutes that they're allowed, and there's no real back and forth dialogue. It's just bringing forth their concerns. So it doesn't take away from the business, as Mr. Douglas he said, council should be here to do business. You're still doing business, you're still able to carry on. So I still think that's an important part of the meeting, is for people to have that say. Now, when I first came to one of my first meetings, I don't know if anybody recalls this, it was a rather an awkward moment for me. And I had brought something up at the tail end. The meeting had already taken place, you guys had already voted on something, it was finalized. I brought up a question of concern about something, have you considered this portion of something? And I was quickly, I don't want to use the word jumped on, but somebody from staff said you cannot and they cannot now have further dialogue on that because it's already been settled. So I was shut down at that point, which was fine. I said, okay, I didn't understand the procedure. This should have been done prior to you guys deciding. So I do see that it's important to have a chance to speak on things on the agenda or other things, but especially on things that may, and a question period at the end, like it was referred just now, at the end of something, it's too late. So you cannot have that input. And so I appreciate a number of things have been spoken, but just for clarification, my concern on that and the ability to, bring something up at the initial stage. I think there still needs to be that opportunity for that. For even at council meeting, you can still have lots of opportunity to conduct business, and with that 12 minutes doesn't take that much time out of that. So. Thank you.
I appreciate that input, and I did just want to clarify that that I remember your first council meeting. That was specifically after it was following a public hearing that had happened, and it was for a development item. And so there's a different set of rules in terms of when we're able to hear new input on that. So that was that situation, but appreciate your input on the rest, and certainly I think it's heard here tonight. Are there additional members of the public who would like to speak, who haven't spoken for a first time? I do see you, Mr. Anderson, but I know that we have a couple people here who have not been up, so just wanted to give them the opportunity first. Okay, then come on forward, Mr. Anderson.
Just some clarification and comments that have been made that I've been involved in over the last number of years. 2 councils. Let's go back that way. Comment made that the code of conduct is for council. Maybe it wasn't exactly what was meant. The code of conduct, from the way I read it, is for council, for staff, and for public. There's 3 parties that should be coming together to write an excellent piece of paper that's going to keep us in line, every one of us, even me. At times. So public input increased, there's a comment, public input increased public engagement. It absolutely did. I use it many times when I saw something on the agenda And let's just say that motion that I believe passed that you made, I'll deal with that in a minute. I used to get up at times under public input, and I'd explain what I thought my feelings were on a certain issue with full intention, because you can't do it at question period. You'll get, and fair enough, I'm not, it's fair enough if you go on, and you've been fairly lenient with me at times. Yes, you have. But you're eventually called out of order before you explain what your question is about. And sometimes questions need an explanation so people understand. So I get up and I talk at the public input with the idea of then presenting questions at the end so everyone at that meeting would then understand what I was talking, what my question was. And that was very valid. And I think that to delete it from the council meetings, what people say, let's just say that amendment wasn't made, and I wish it wasn't. But if someone says this is coming up at this meeting, they have a chance to speak on it. And by doing that, they enlighten council as to maybe something that they weren't aware of. And when they were maybe ready to approve something, they might say, oh, that speaker that got up, that made some sense, let's rethink this. It was a positive thing. And there was very few, there was a couple, and I wasn't involved in them, where there was some confrontation. People didn't understand that it wasn't questions to be allowed. And that's an easy resolve, and et cetera. So anyway, I'm sorry to see that go. I remain that way. I wish there wasn't a motion to amend. Not that I don't agree with it, but I've been listening to all the comments here this afternoon, and I'm firmly convinced that we are not ready to adopt anything here. There's so many questions came up that leaves things that need to be ironed out. I don't agree, let's pass it, and we can make amendments later on. It doesn't happen that easy. To change something once it's established can be very difficult. And I think this is worth the time to spend on to make this a lot better than it really is. And Mr. Smith brought up issues that I also believe in. I've also we're talking about question period. Once at least with this present council, but certainly on 2 other occasions, I questioned with no success. If I ask a question, if a person asks a question under question period, and I was part of the process that when we decided that sometimes you required 2 weeks to respond, I was part of that discussion, and when that was initiated. And of course, there's questions that you can't respond right away. But there's a difference, as I've said before, and you're probably tired of me, there's this between a response and an answer to questions that are asked. Big difference. And so the response to that question that came 2 weeks later would come under unfinished business. And so the person that asked the question under question period had no way of saying, well, look, you haven't answered my question, or your question isn't consistent with what it doesn't resolve the issue. But so you have no opportunity. You have to accept whatever's been told. In my experience, quite often, it didn't answer the question. So I suggested 2 things would happen. Either you put new business prior to question period, where the person who's in attendance who asked that question would have an opportunity to just have some feedback forth. I know that now that's being restricted where you can't have any discussion on issues. Or that new business was put down back there, or that the question period, as been discussed by someone else, happened earlier on the meeting. So you ensure that you were getting an answer to your question is basically what I'm talking about. And that's been a big issue certainly for me anyway. Just give me a chance to go through my little notes. I don't have much here. So my suggestion, that I don't know if this was meant at the end, is that we do not, back to the question of the amendment that was made, I don't think that was the right thing to do, my opinion, because there's so many things that need to be changed. And by deleting one at a time is not a productive way of dealing with the problem. It has to be relooked at and reassessed as to what is in the best interest of all three parties. And one party hasn't had an opportunity to speak out. And so I'm hoping that before the end of this day, we don't start piecemealing and changing this and changing that, that we take a thorough look at the whole thing and start to, and present a comprehensive report on what we think is a more positive report that also includes the well-being of the people in this community. I have a few other things, but they're all mixed up when I'm sitting there. So thank you. So I'm hoping that this goes on, not to another meeting 2 weeks from now, but that we have enough time to properly get a good idea of how all the parties feel. This is not, I get the feeling that this report is here to protect the interests of City Council. I may be wrong, but this is the feeling I get from my experiences. And instead of realizing that there's another parties, and that's the people who come up to this podium, that their interests need to be acknowledged too. I won't go on any longer.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. So we do have a motion on the floor, which is to, sorry, I don't have any more comments for you specifically. We do have a motion on the floor, which is to defer this to a future committee of the whole.
Can I speak? Or?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I had called prior, so come on forward. I was waiting on other speakers other than Mr. Anderson.
I don't mind if Neil gets up before me. Thank you, Gabe, for letting me address you. Leslie Valerius. And this time we're speaking on the procedures bylaw. And I noticed there's lots of options and lots of sections, and basically we're talking just about public hearings and things like that. But there's lots of questions I have. So the requirement for council members to attend these meetings, is it mandatory that all councillors attend committee of the whole, or is it an option?
I'll go to our corporate officer.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the attendance provisions for the committee of the whole are the same as council. So it would require quorum, so not mandatory attendance by all members, but obviously that would be encouraged and quorum would be the minimum.
And what's quorum?
Simple majority, so 4.
Okay. And Councillor Haggard is coming in electronically, so I guess that would be a portion of the quorum then too as well. Okay. And what about community engagement through electronic means? Will they be able to come in with their questions and their comments as well, or is it just a visual?
Thank you for that. Go to our corporate officer.
Through you, Madam Chair. So right now, there is not a provision in the bylaw that specifically permits or rather mandates that electronic participation by the public be included. We have, under Committee of the Wholes, included electronic participation in the past. So, for example, I believe it was the March 20th or March 6th financial plan where we had the discussion. We did open it up on a webinar platform so that members of the public could attend electronically. They could ask questions electronically. So we do have the ability within the bylaw, but also outside of the bylaw, to also have those opportunities for the public to be able to engage, like Councillor Haggard is essentially, within the meeting, and then have the corporate officer or someone else kind of not govern, but control and monitor that participation as well. So there are definitely opportunities that can be had for that. Now, it's not built into the bylaw to require it for committee of the whole. It is specified within the report as an option for council's consideration if they want to make that an option in there.
I would like to see that incorporated, if possible. I guess because we went through COVID, that these kind of communications are very important to our community. Councillor Zola, you mentioned communications and getting this information out to the public. Last year, I spoke at the finance meeting about the importance of Local Government Week, and that's coming up in May. And there's different opportunities within the city to showcase yourselves. And whether it's a purchase of a new garbage truck or a suggestion of introducing people on how to get to council and be informed within the community. I just think it's a good opportunity. Invite them down to the workshop. You know, there's so many opportunities, you know. And then there's Asset Management Day on May the 17th. And as we progress through asset management, maybe that would be something to showcase as well and encourage public engagement. Okay, now onto my difficult one here. I'm just making comments. Sometimes I hope you grasp my ideas. I was concerned about this one. It's a deletion and a replace with the following. It's section 11, attendance at public meetings. The mayor or the presiding member may expel or exclude from the meeting a person in attendance at the meeting in accordance with section 133 of the community charter. And it gives the ability to the chair to expel individuals who are not conducting themselves respectfully or inappropriately in meetings. I did not know that this was a major issue. Is this a safety issue for council?
Corporate Officer.
Absolutely, through you, Madam Chair. In short, it can be a safety issue, but generally speaking, it's when you have a member of the public who is not kind of responding to the chair and calls for them to either settle down or sit down. It is well within the chair's prerogative, and that's why it's under the community charter there to control the meeting. And if that control is being lost and cannot be regained, whether that's a conduct of an individual, the chair does have the power to expel an individual. And that's under the charter. That provision was in the bylaw before. It was pre-existing. The wording around it wasn't quite in line with the community charter, which is why it's in there as an amendment, just to tweak it. But that power does exist by the chair in the act.
Okay. Okay, and
yeah, and for the safety, so that, yeah, and it applies broadly, like members of the public in attendance, counselors as well. Basically, the chair has the control of the meeting to expel staff, even if, you know, anybody is acting out of order.
yeah, so it's not just for the public, it could be a counselor and it could be anybody, okay. And who actually makes that decision? The chair makes that decision?
Yes.
Oh, I better be disruptive. Okay. So if you have difficulty expelling this person, will we be having an RCMP officer and a bylaw enforcement officer at each meeting?
If we had difficulty expelling a person, the first thing we would do was have a motion to recess and pause the meeting. So we certainly would not jump to having an RCMP officer here or getting to that point. We have not had to do that before. I don't anticipate we'll have to do it. And I think important to note, as our corporate officer did, that this is a community charter right and authority and not specific to our procedures bylaw. So this is just what exists in the community charter with some minor wording amendments to make sure that our procedures are in line with that.
Good. I was hoping we wouldn't have to get to zap strapping the chairs, which has been done at the athletic hall before. Yeah, have to go to more meetings. Okay. My next one is approaching the podium. And we are to state our name and our location. Will that be incorporated into this?
Corporate Officer.
Through you, Madam Chair. While the bylaw still does request that people do identify themselves, it is simply as identify themselves. So whether that is by first name, by last name, if they so choose to include their address, it's not required. So it's just a provision that still exists there just to encourage people to be a member of the community or with relevant interests that are presented to council and give council an indication, obviously, of who the individual is. But no, they do not need to require their full name or address.
Okay, but is that going to be in the procedure bylaw, that information?
Through Madam Chair, it is currently in the procedures bylaw.
Oh, okay, good, okay. Okay, and the questions that to be brought forward that they have to adhere to the agenda, does this apply to both the committee of the whole meeting as well as the regular council meeting?
Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with the with the most recent recommendation, and as the only recommendation so far to change, the question period items, or sorry, the public input period items at committee of the whole no longer have to relate to the agenda. I believe the question period items still do relate to the items on the agenda. And that's more because as it's written right now, the intent is that those questions relate to the decisions of the committee or council of the day, just to clarify those decisions or the reports that were presented.
And that is at regular council as well as committee of the whole.
At both of them, okay. Scheduling of meetings for public input. Currently, there's 21 meetings a year of regular council and 9 for committee of the whole. So there is a section in this new thing about reducing meetings in the summer and at Christmas break. So this is going to, again, reduce public input period. Will you be discussing the schedule of increasing, decreasing, looking at that amendment again?
Thank you. Corporate Officer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as kind of some of the other items that have been discussed, whether that's from council's past or from an administration side, some of the options for inclusion for council's consideration for further amendments. There is discussion around whether consideration of a summer break or a Christmas break being included in the schedule for council is included in there. As far as the committee of the wholes go, as you know, the public and council and staff kind of adapt to whatever new processes if this is adopted, it is anticipated that more committee of the wholes will be required. So while right now we have the ones on the calendar that were scheduled in November, it is anticipated that there will be more going forward, and some of those would be, I wouldn't say as needed, it probably, with council's discussion around their own schedules and how that works, their preferred dates and such, that would shape what dates, I guess, those additional committee of the wholes will fall on, whether that's semi-regularly or if it's as needed.
Thank you.
The reason I bring this up is that the committee of whole does not meet according to the schedule, in August and September. And what you have up there is no meetings in the month of August. So that would be no communications with the public in the month of August if you proceeded with that particular option. So that's why I'm bringing this up, because it's a concern that the public will not be engaged with our council. Correspondence. I'm quite a regular writer, and I guess a lot of the concern that I'm feeling with the people that I know that are attending tonight is that, how do you word this nicely? I've written letters, that never made it to council, never made it on an agenda. Oh, I lost your communications. Oh, the email got lost. Oh, it was in my junk mail. I go, oh my gosh, how did this happen? So it's the new changeover, I think, that's got us a little bit worried and skeptical about the process when it comes to correspondence. Our letters have not always been addressed. We're never responded to in a written format. Somebody might say something in a council meeting that was to cover the letter, but it required more than just a blip. It should have been properly addressed with a letter. And I know our new CAO is doing that quite nicely. Thank you very much for your responding to my letters. But again, we're skeptical, and we would like to see them on the agenda. I know you have an action section and an informal section. You receive committee reports and public information, other government reports, society reports, all under correspondence. I mean, maybe you want to section them out and say which ones will be responded to and which ones are, truly just information. And I guess that's my main one, because I'm not one who likes to get up to the podium. I don't like this. I always feel like I'm on stage. Ta-da. But I'm not a very good actor. So anyway, those are my questions, and I would like a lot of consideration being put into correspondence if possible.
Thank you, Ms. Valerius. And I do just want to comment that with the proposal that is in front of us, any letters that you write to council that are for council business will continue to be on an agenda, will continue to be dealt with in the way that council can specifically request a response be made. If your letters are operational in nature only, they will be dealt with by staff. But the bulk of the letters you write are not operational in nature only. Those letters would continue to come to council.
Yeah, what I'm saying is some of them got dropped, put into junk mail as was written back to me.
So I do understand your
So,
comment there.
Yeah,
It's
it
not,
gets to be, will they be received? Will we
Yes.
know that they're received?
if they are
We
to
don't
do with
have an
council
automatic-
business, I do understand your comment. If they are to do with council business, they will continue to be on a council agenda. If in the past there have been errors with your letters, this bylaw or proposed bylaw would not be relevant to those errors.
Okay. My suggestion would be for public submitting a letter is that there is an opportunity for the IT department to provide, when you send a letter, that it's received, so that it would flip back and say, thank you very much, we've received your correspondence, an automatic reply. And that doesn't happen within the city. And it would be nice if that was incorporated so that the people know if they sent a message off to the Director of Parks and Rec or Department of Engineering or, anybody in general, that they would get an automatic response.
Thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. It would not be covered in the procedures bylaw because it's not relevant to council procedures for our meetings. However, it's a great suggestion and something that I'm sure our CAO will follow up on
Great.
what our current procedure is.
Good, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks for letting me ask my questions.
Thank you. Okay, council, we do have a motion on the floor to defer, and that is specific to the procedures bylaw, and that is to defer to an additional committee of the whole meeting. Are there comments on that motion at this time? Councillor Douglas.
Well, I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I'd be perfectly satisfied with going ahead with recommending this motion as is.
Thank you. And I'm going to, I think, echo that. While I think discussion is valuable, I think we've had a lot of discussion tonight. There's certainly some things that I would like to change to this procedures bylaw, but we will have opportunity to do that in a structured way when it comes to an additional council meeting. I haven't heard yet tonight any requests for specific new information that needs to come to council in order for us to consider this. I think sometimes we put things off without any request for anything new to help us guide the decision. If we just want to have more conversation about it, we can have more conversation about it at a council meeting. I'm sure we will receive additional public input. We could certainly receive letters that would be included in correspondence because they are a council business. And those could come to the council meeting where we would possibly pass or amend this bylaw as well. So I personally do not support the motion that is to defer to an additional council meeting. I would like to see this proceed to, or sorry, to defer to a committee of the whole meeting. I would like to see this proceed to a council meeting where we will have a format in front of us to make changes, to possibly consider some of the alternative options that have been suggested as well, and to go through that in a bit of a process. Other comments? Okay. Seeing no comments, then I'll call the question on the motion to defer to a committee of the whole meeting. All in favor? Opposed?
Opposed?
Motion defeated. Thank you. Would anyone like to move the motion that is on the agenda or an alternative motion? Councillor Douglas.
And we're referring to the council procedures recommendation? Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. Well, I can do both if you like. Okay. So number one, referring to our agenda sheet, I'd like to make a motion that Committee of the Whole recommend Council approve Council Code of Conduct Policy 3002-01.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Solda. Comments on this recommendation? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. Thank you. None opposed. And Councillor Douglas.
And on item number 2, I'd like to make a motion that Committee of the Whole recommend Council consider Council Procedures Amendment Bylaw number 5082, 2023 for 3 readings.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Dame. And just for clarity, this would include the amendment that was previously passed when it comes forward to Council for 3 readings. Additional to that, Council would have ample opportunity to make further amendments under the multiple readings. Any comments on this portion? Okay, seeing none on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone for all the discussion this evening. We do have another item on our agenda tonight still, but again, I did just want to note that these 2 items, the previous 2 items that have had ample conversation, will come to an additional meeting of council where you'll have the opportunity, if you'd like to speak at public input period, or to write correspondence prior to be included on that agenda. And I would just really like to thank our consultant, Mr. Jerry Berry, for being here tonight and for all of the input that he's provided into this process as well. Thank you. So Council, we will move on to item number 3, City of Port Alberni Building Bylaw number 5077. And we'll welcome our Director of Development Services and Deputy CAO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So before the committee is a draft outline of a new building bylaw. I would note that there's still some formatting that needs to be done on that, on the bylaw. So it does cover regulations, procedures, and fees in regards to building and building permits within the city of Port Alberni. And we're seeking the committee's comments, questions, and potential referral of this to a council meeting and any input that the public may have. Currently, the city has a building bylaw that was adopted in 2006 and was consolidated in 2016. There has been a substantial number of updates to the BC Building Code, and including the province introducing the STEP code since this bylaw was considered. The Municipal Insurance Association of BC, in conjunction with the Building Officials Association of BC, other professional associations, and the Lidstone Law Firm, developed a model building bylaw, or several model building bylaws for local governments to consider. So a lot of due diligence was done on this work. And so the city staff, in consultation with Lidstone, have based this new building bylaw on the small cities model that was developed by that group, provincial-wide, and of course amended it to City of Port Alberni's needs. One of the things that I did want to indicate that, of course, the province of BC has established the Energy Step Code, and that portion of that step code on May 1st, 2023, will come into force province-wide, in where simple buildings, Part 9, or else, a single-family dwelling, will be required to meet Step Code 3, and complex building will be required to meet Step Code 2 targets. Staff did actually hold a workshop in the fall at Echo Center, which we had about 70 people attend in our construction and building industry. And we had technical experts there as well as, and we partnered with the regional district to do this, to provide this level of information to our local building industry in anticipation of this, of coming forward in the building code. And of course, that information was then provided on our City Let's Connect page. So this draft building bylaw does incorporate those regulations that were part of the BC Building Code and other ministerial orders on that. Probably a substantial portion of this proposed bylaw is we have not had any changes to our building permit fees since the adoption of this bylaw in 2006. So our fees are, I don't hazard a guess to say, amongst the lowest in the province. Staff have consulted with our city's building consultant and looked at other fees across the province and the municipalities, and are essentially are proposing that they come more in alignment with what other municipal governments are charging for their building permit process. In addition to that, we have reviewed a number of fees that we were not charging for in our building permit bylaw, such as incorporating damage deposits that could occur for damage on public lands. And essentially this occurs sometimes where if a building has occurred, if the contractor's not doing proper due diligence, sometimes they may crack our sidewalk or often break some of the inspection chambers or connection fees. And this would ensure that we have a mechanism to ensure that those are fixed and not at the taxpayer's expense. So the proposed fees, there was a couple examples in the staff report, and I'll just kind of go over them for council. Based on a construction value of a single-family house of $500,000, the current fee is $2,474. The proposed fee would be about $3,600. Another example for a larger project is, I'll use an example of a 2022 63-unit apartment building that had a construction value of like $10,200,000. The permit fee for that was just a little, almost $24,000. Under the new fee, it would be $72,000. So we are talking a fairly substantial leap, but I guess I want to say is how long we've had these fees and how little they've changed. To give a bit of a comparison to, for instance, the ACRD, and a lot of the fees you'll see, there's a whole slew of different fees, but the main construction value fee, essentially we are proposing that it would be $7 per thousand of construction value. And currently the ACRDs, the way they charge it, it's $7 per thousand for the first basically $500,000, and then it drops down to $6 for any value over top of that. So ours are slightly higher at the upper end, but we wanted to make them more simple as opposed to trying to do phasing. Another example is the city of Nanaimo. They charge $10 per thousand for the first 100,000 and then drop down to $7. So we would be below Nanaimo. Other municipalities are more complicated. Langford starts at $12 per the first 100,000 and then varies very, very widely. So we've looked at those and proposing to bring our fees up to comparable fees that other municipalities on the island are looking at. One thing I would like to say, this is an administrative bylaw, does not technically require public notice or a public hearing. It would come to council for 3 readings and then proceed. One thing that we are seeking, based on public input and questions council have, is whether council would like us to specifically consult with the building industry prior to this coming to council for consideration. And then I'd be pleased to answer any question councils have or members of the public.
Thank you very much. I do remember when this came previously to council, we had a chart, which was, and it was a year or 2 ago, but I thought it was very valuable because it compared, that jump from 23,000 to 75,000 seems insane, but it really compared what that same building would be in several communities on Vancouver Island, and we very much were the outlier. So compared with other communities on Vancouver Island, and then compared, of course, with the regional district as well. So I know you've provided some comment as to that, but that previous chart that we were shown really, for me, kind of validated just how broad we are very much the outlier in terms of undercharging. So I'm happy to see this coming forward, and I think the sooner we can implement, the better, as obviously our costs have gone up, and we certainly need to keep in line with what other municipalities are doing.
And staff can ensure that some level of more detailed chart and comparison is brought forward when this comes to council for consideration.
Great, thank you. Comments from council? Councillor Douglas.
I'd just say, I think one of the things we've done in the past, maybe in the last couple decades anyways, we've undervalued the city we live in and been afraid of charging appropriate amounts. I think it's really commendable that staff has come forward with this and fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, I'm going to make the motion that the Committee of the Whole recommend council consider City of Port Alberni Building Bylaw number 5077 for 3 readings.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Mealy. Any additional public comment, comments from council before I go to public? Okay, seeing none. Any comments from members of the public? Okay. Seeing none, then on the motion, all in favor?
Yes.
Carried. None opposed. Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. So no correspondence tonight, no new business noted on the agenda. Any items of new business councillors would like to bring forward? Seeing none, we will go to question period. This is an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions if there are any remaining for the evening. Okay, then would somebody like to move adjournment? Moved by Councillor Mealy, seconded by Councillor Douglas. All in favor? Carried, I think carried.